Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Boris Zinghausen with you. Today is May 11th and we have a lot of very interesting news. So Putin is still rejecting an unconditional ceasefire and is proposing a meeting in Istanbul on Thursday. Meanwhile, new sanctions are literally hanging over Russia. They will be very, very painful. Putin is being pressured and the pressure is quite professional. And as a result, Medvedev has had a real meltdown. Also in this episode, we'll talk about the ongoing spy scandal between Ukraine and Hungary. And the developments there are very interesting. If this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. So let's get into it. So Putin is rejecting the unconditional 30-day ceasefire that was proposed to him by Ukraine, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Poland, and the United States. In other words, he was asked a completely straightforward question, yes or no. Are you going to stop the fighting for 30 days starting Monday or not? Naturally, Putin came out and started talking about how Russia has never rejected a ceasefire and wanted negotiations. Let's sit down at the negotiating table in Istanbul. Let's talk again, negotiate again. Let's. No one ever got a clear, understandable explanation as to why it's possible to cease fire for Easter and May 9th, but not on Monday. By the way, after Putin came out and started his lengthy speech, he said one extremely interesting phrase in his remarks. I'm quoting it in full. Right now there is a war and we are proposing negotiations. So for the first time, he called the war a war. But what about those who called the so-called special military operation a war and got fined for it, and some even received real prison sentences? What should we do with them? You see, tomorrow, Putin could just as easily say that, in fact, we've already won. Even if he completely withdraws troops from Ukraine, he'll say, that's exactly what we wanted. That was our plan all along. And people will applaud him. And Duzhev, all decked out, will come out. And Chicharina will appear, connected to open space. And Gazmanov will show up, tearing 18 striped shirts off himself. And they'll all say, this is our leader. Look where he's led us. What a great guy. So, instead of giving a concrete answer, Putin came out to this press conference, and many, by the way, noted that he seemed rather confused, mumbling uncertainly. What did he say at this press conference? There were a lot of interesting points, and some of them indicate that he has fewer and fewer options left. So, I quote, "In this regard, I want to say that, as is known, Russia has repeatedly put forward initiatives to cease fire. However, these initiatives have been sabotaged time and again by the Ukrainian side. So, the Kyiv regime demonstratively violated the 30-day, let me emphasize this, says Putin, the 30-day moratorium on strikes against energy facilities about 130 times. Interesting. Which Putin, agreed upon with the President of the United States, Donald Trump. See how he tries to associate himself with the strong. But that's not all. The Easter truce initiated by Russia was also not observed. The ceasefire was violated by Ukrainian forces almost 5,000 times. What a scumbag. The Easter truce, and the strike with a cluster ballistic missile on Sumy on Palm Sunday when 34 people were killed, including 2 children, and more than 117 people were wounded. What a vile, vile creature you are. Russia. Here he is telling us that Russia has repeatedly put forward initiatives for a ceasefire. Here it should be added, with ceasefire initiatives that are only beneficial to itself. When our side started very successfully terrorizing Russian oil refineries, not just refineries, but also oil and gas pipelines, that's when this Kremlin frostbitten one started talking about stopping strikes on energy infrastructure. And Ukraine met them halfway. When he was worried that something might hit red and square, that's when he wanted a truce, more for May 9th. But I have a feeling that each time this attempt by that 1.5 meter tall con artist to fool everyone else, primarily the US of course, well, each time this attempt gets more and more complicated, significantly more complicated. And the fact that Putin immediately responded and proposed a time and place, Thursday, Istanbul, shows that he has less room to maneuver, That's exactly right. And he understands that he can't keep playing with words without consequences anymore. New sanctions are literally hanging over him. And now, no one in Russia is laughing anymore, right? No one is wearing t-shirts that say, "Don't make our Iskanders laugh." And no one is talking about how sanctions are supposedly benefiting the Russian economy. I think a lot of people have noticed that as well. Lately, you don't hear from those sanctioned optimists anymore, do you? And let me remind you that the coalition of the willing, which arrived in Kyiv, proposed a very specific formula for a 30-day ceasefire with a clear understanding of who would monitor it and how this ceasefire would be monitored. And after that, this is the most important part. After that, the leaders of France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Poland had a phone call with Donald Trump. Each of them, let me remind you, had a mandate to conduct these negotiations on behalf of the United States. So Putin, he has now refused the United States as well. That's what it is. And then this Putin, sometimes I'm just amazed that how can someone with all that hyaluronic acid in one bag, how can he just lie so blatantly, so stupidly? You know, some people at least blush or their eye might twitch, but he just sits there and lies just like that. It's an absolute lack of empathy. Although, what kind of empathy are we even talking about if he came to power on the blood of his own citizens, blowing up Russian apartment buildings together with Patrushev? Let me continue quoting. It was just one outrageous thing after another coming out of his mouth. Nevertheless, for the celebration of Victory Day, which we also consider a sacred holiday, this is Putin speaking. Just imagine, we lost 27 million people. So, for this sacred holiday, we declared a ceasefire for the third in time. For this sacred holiday of ours. Now, I understand why there were kids sitting in the stands next to Putin. Remember, in the last and the one before last episode, I pointed out that there were kids in pilot caps sitting there, and some chubby-cheeked boy kept trying to get into the frame, smiling and all that. Now I understand why the kids were there. Obviously, no one would ever strike the stands where world leaders are sitting, especially since Putin sat Xi Jinping right next to him. And since that balding rat managed to sneak in among those presidents and prime ministers, of course, no one would attack. But seating the kids there, as an extra precaution, that's just perfect. The thing is, no matter how much Putin tries to hide it, his true nature keeps showing through from time to time. You know, it's sneaky, petty, and vindictive. And since we live in the age of television and the internet, which Putin doesn't use, his true nature often ends up on camera. And now I want to remind you and show you that very historic video where back in 2014, Putin explains how he's going to wage war against Ukraine. Watch this video.
I'm not worried about that because we are not going to and will not fight against the Ukrainian people.
But there is a Ukrainian military, there is a Ukrainian army.
Or do you not believe that?
Listen to me. Now listen carefully. I want you to understand me absolutely clearly. If we make such a decision, it will only be to protect Ukrainian citizens. And let's see if any of the servicemen dare to shoot at their own people. The ones will be standing behind, not in front, but behind. Let them try to shoot at women and children. I want to see who in Ukraine would give such an order.
May I ask a question?
Please.
We will stand behind their women and children, and they won't dare shoot at us. Has anything changed since then? Is he waging this war any differently? Now, he's done everything he talked about back in 2014. He stood behind Ukrainian citizens, women, children, the elderly, and is fighting. And those kids in the stands, how is that not using them as a shield? So for him, it's natural to hide behind someone's back, this cowardly little soul peeking out from around the corner and doing everything with someone else's hands. Notice with someone else's hands. Only when he realizes that, A, nothing will hit his bald head does he then say, "That was me." In Donbass? Well, yeah, some little guys over there, that's not us. In Crimea? Well, that's not us either. Those are green or maybe brown little men. Then when they realize, he peeked out from around the corner, Obama isn't imposing any sanctions. Well, that was me. That's us, so to speak. Yes, that was us. Then he admits it. That's his sneaky nature for you. A great warrior, what can you say, hiding behind women and children? But what about all that Russian talk of officers' honor and so on? What about all of that? It's just empty words. Officers, real warriors, don't come onto someone else's land, to their neighbor, to whom they gave assurances that they wouldn't come. They don't fight, don't kill, don't wipe peaceful cities off the face of the earth. Forget about the words officer and honor when it comes to the Russian army. By the way, friends, now we're moving on to, well, the statement is just complete nonsense. We'll get to that in a moment, but don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And if you're already subscribed, hit the bell icon. So, Putin continues. What do we see? What are these results? The Kyiv authorities, as you can clearly see for yourselves, did not respond at all to our proposal for a ceasefire. Moreover, after we announced our proposal, which, as you remember, happened on May 5th, the Kyiv authorities launched large-scale attacks as early as the night of May 6th to 7th. I have one question for Russians who still believe that Putin is saving Russia, lifting it up from its knees, and so on. Well, actually, two questions. First, who put it on its knees in the first place? And the second question is this. Don't you yourselves find it disgusting to listen to a Tsar, who has ruled your vast, enormous country for nearly 30 years, a country with colossal resources, oil, gas, timber, diamonds, you name it, aluminum, uranium, a country that possesses nuclear weapons. And yet this Tsar is whining that Ukraine is attacking the Russian Federation. But Ukraine isn't attacking. Ukraine is defending itself. Ukraine is striking at a country that attacked it first. And the troops of that country are on our territory. Do you know what this reminds me of? When Putin whines, Ukraine violated, didn't violate. Do you know what this looks like? It's like in school. Probably everyone had some thug who was always taking out his anger on the younger students. And then one of those younger kids finally stood up to him, hit back so hard that the bully started whining and ran off to a corner to sulk. So this is exactly what it looks like. Would you ever feel compassion for someone who constantly bullies their neighbors, thinking they're weaker? And now when he finally gets a proper response, he starts whining. Ukraine is violating the rules and so on. That's why I think there wouldn't be any compassion. Next, as I already mentioned, the Kyiv authorities, this is Putin speaking, not only rejected our proposal, but also tried to intimidate the leaders of the states gathered for the celebrations in Moscow. Oh my, intimidating the leaders of other countries. Can you even imagine this Kyiv regime? It's just some kind of global outlaw. And now, you know what? Let's imagine, some of the old school crowd will surely remember this. Let's imagine that you, Kolya Gerasimov and Fima Korolev, found a time machine in the basement. By the way, for those who don't know, a few years ago, I came across a story about what happened to the actors. So Kolya Gerasimov, whose real last name was Fomkin, ended up drinking himself to death and burned, suffocating, somewhere in a house in a village. In general, it's a classic story for Russia. Let's imagine that we found this time machine and traveled to the year 2013. Back then, Putin hadn't yet reached out his bony little hand to Crimea or Donbass and hadn't started a full-scale war. And here's a question. Can you imagine in 2013 Putin coming out or just hearing something like this and starting to talk about how Ukraine is striking Russia, behaving badly, yet just launching hundreds of drones and intimidating world leaders, well, actually just a handful more precisely, a bunch of dictators who came to see Putin, because about 80% of those who used to come didn't show up for this parade. So Putin comes out and says, it's Ukraine that's violating, attacking, shells are flying, drones are flying, they've scared off world leaders from Red Square. Here I am, forced on one side to shield myself with Xi Jinping, on the other side with some fake veteran, and even put a big-eared kid in a pilot cap behind me, so I don't get taken out right there. Can you even imagine something like that in 2013? And now that's the reality. Putin has really lifted Russia off its knees. Well, moving on. Now we're about to finish up this nonsense of his. In this regard, despite everything, we propose that the Kiev authorities resume negotiations. Did you notice that? Kiev authorities, Kiev regime, and so on. Actually, it's the Ukrainian authorities, not the Kiev authorities. Despite everything, we propose to stop, or rather to resume, the negotiations that were interrupted at the end of 2022. To resume direct talks. And I emphasize, says Putin, without any preconditions. We propose to start without delay already next Thursday, May 15th in Istanbul, the same place where they were previously held and where they were interrupted. Putin reminds us that it was interrupted by the Kiev regime, that they were the ones who broke the agreements. This kind of reminds me of how Donald Trump is always flashbacking to Biden, making references. So, Donald Trump, what do you think of this orange? He says, it's a wonderful orange. But it would be garbage, not an orange, if Biden were president. To me, this reminds me of some kind of deep centuries-old internal resentment that Putin has toward Ukraine. And actually, it's wonderful that he'll die with Ukraine on his lips. And Ukraine will become the lid of his coffin. We are ready for serious negotiations with Ukraine. The point is to eliminate the root causes of the conflict, to achieve a long-term lasting peace with a historical perspective and blah, 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 woof, 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 meow, 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 says Putin. But seriously? Eliminating the root causes of the conflict, this is actually some new catchphrase, a lifeline for Putin and his circle. I've said it many times already. None of the official Russian spokespeople have ever explained what this phrase actually means. The root causes of the conflict, it's some vague, abstract concept that is deliberately emphasized, deliberately left without any concrete meaning. And then Putin wraps it up by saying, I'll repeat, Russia is ready for negotiations without any preconditions. It's not about negotiations for you. Specifically, you are being asked by 4 countries, plus the United States, plus Ukraine. Will you agree to a ceasefire? Are you ready for a 30-day truce or not? We are ready for, and so on and so forth. In fact, there is less and less room left to maneuver. By the way, friends, let me remind you that for now, I think this scoundrel can still keep stringing along Donald Trump and world leaders for quite some time, though not for much longer, because Ukraine already, everyone understands perfectly well what to do with him and what not to do. Therefore, and since our soldiers have to fight every day, every minute, let me remind you that we have a large and important fundraiser for the Freedom of Russia Legion, for the operators of assault drones, and for the operators of reconnaissance drones, plus for those who create and skillfully modify these interesting devices that are dropped from drones onto the heads of Russians. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video, and the link to the fundraiser is also in the comments to this video. If you're not watching on my channel, there's a QR code right here. By scanning it, you'll go directly to the Legion's fundraising page. There you'll also find the Legion's bank card number, and in the description there's a PayPal link for those who want to help destroy the swamp filth here in Ukraine. A huge thank you to everyone who helps. So now, friends, there will be a new, the newest personal Putin story. So Putin says the following. At the same time, I would like to once again express my gratitude for the mediation services, the efforts aimed at a peaceful resolution of the Ukrainian crisis, which our foreign partners are undertaking. And who might that be? Both China and Brazil and the countries of Africa and the Middle East and lately the new administration of the United States. What do African countries have to do with this at all? I remember once representatives from African countries came here. These are the ones to whom Putin is constantly writing off debts. And they said, accept Putin's proposal. They were told, go back to Mindot, your own continent, return in peace. And so they left. That's it. So now Putin has African countries. And, as I said in yesterday's episode, now he claims the Chinese people made some colossal contribution to the victory in World War II. You know, a couple of important points after everything Putin said, do a couple of very important points. The fact that the rat is being skillfully pressured has become obvious to everyone. Moreover, the pressure is professional, comprehensive, and coordinated. And the fact that the rat is squealing, resisting, biting, snapping back, that's a fact. He came out with his speech, albeit with a slight delay, but he did come out. And it was clear that he was very unsure of himself. He's trying to buy time now, but it's becoming harder and harder to do so. And one more important point. Now, Donald Trump has no grounds to say that both Ukraine and Russia don't want peace, and that he is dissatisfied with both Ukraine and Russia. Although, believe me, there was never any reason to say that before either. There was no basis for it. Probably just out of habit, because Ukraine had offered an unconditional 30-day, 60-day ceasefire almost 2 months ago. Well, at least a month and a half ago for sure. In fact, representatives of European countries and Ukraine and the US acted this time with a unified mandate. This is a very important point. Look at Trump. Nah? Well, Trump, honestly, I don't know. I definitely wouldn't sit down at the same table to play with him. Not for anything. Not chess. No. Well, maybe I'd play chess with him, but definitely not cards. Look at how he pulled a trick this time, too. He managed it so that he was present in the negotiations. But at the same time, it was as if he wasn't there. He gave the European leaders the mandate, it's not me, it's them. But they coordinate everything with him. In fact, now, maybe, reluctantly, but they'll have to impose sanctions. They'll have to. And I'd like to remind you that just literally a month ago, the relationship with Donald Trump was so friendly. Dmitriev went to the US and Witkoff flew to meet with Putin. And then Witkoff was telling stories about how at the so-called referendum, obviously fake referendums, the region supposedly wanted to join Russia. And about all those things like who gave what to whom and who created Ukraine. In other words, they reprogrammed Witkoff there in no time. And they were planning to fly to Mars with Elon Musk and Dmitriev, someone else. And they were going to give him money. Remember? That was just a month ago. And now look how everything has suddenly changed. Ukraine has completely turned the negotiation track around. By the way, friends, here's a quick attentiveness test. It's very short. Take a look. Which channel are you watching me on right now? The name of the channel is right below this video. My official channel, where videos are released much earlier, is called Boris Tizengausen. If you see a different channel name, that happens, many channels, repost this video. That's why I recommend you take just a few seconds and subscribe to the official channel. It's as easy as can be. Just type Boris Tizengausen into the YouTube search and you'll see the original channel and a subscribe button. Just click that button and that's it. You're on the original channel and that's where I read the comments. And Ukraine isn't letting up on Putin. Ukraine will be ready to enter into direct negotiations with Russia. That's right. If an agreement is reached on a 30-day ceasefire, go ahead. Announce the agreement on a 30-day ceasefire. Putin is terribly afraid of losing this key advantage in the air. Missiles, drones, he's really scared. That's why he keeps stalling, making excuses, saying maybe later, and just refusing. And they're pressing him over and over. Well, and it seems Trump was satisfied that Ukraine accepted the ceasefire and agreed to direct talks with Russia. As for the ceasefire, we've long been ready for direct negotiations. There you go, just announce it tomorrow. And the day after tomorrow, we'll sit down at the table. But here, friends, things blew up. Exactly where I think you fully expected. Medvedev called on Western leaders to shove, and I'm quoting here, their peace initiatives on Ukraine up their pangenda behinds. There it is, you see? What's on Putin's mind there is on Medvedev's tongue, so it just slipped out. And even Putin himself is afraid of this. He always acts through someone else's hands, even if they're Medvedev's paws. But still, he says, go on, go. It's that kind of creep who eggs you on. Go on, go, say it, come on. I can't, they'll Write me up in the record book. You go, say it. That's exactly it. That's what it is. So, Medvedev wrote and accused, or Duplis, of course, the leaders of France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Poland of supposedly issuing ultimatums and threats to Moscow under the guise of peace initiatives. I quote, "It was expected that Macron, Merkel, Starmer, and Tusk would come to Kiev to talk about peace, but instead they are hurling threats at Russia, either a ceasefire to give the Banderite hordes a break, or new sanctions. Do you think this is reasonable? Shove these peace plans up your pangender asses," Medvedev wrote. But what is this fixation Medvedev has with telling people to shove things somewhere? What is that about? Any psychologist, by the way, will tell you what that means. Medvedev, you really shouldn't make it so obvious. Can you imagine how bad he must be feeling? He was recently spotted at the parade. He just couldn't sit still at all. He didn't know whether to fall asleep and to pass out or to write something like that. And at the same time, of course, Medvedev allowed himself another series of harsh and disparaging remarks, and they naturally directed at Zelensky, hinting at the possibility of a strike on Kyiv. Who would doubt it? Really, who would doubt it? And what do you think? I'll leave out those epithets like typhus louse and so on. By the way, let me remind you, Medvedev recently spoke in front of some school children, some youth group, and put all these phrases up on a big screen. The impotent West, grunting piglets. He displayed his own quotes and, dressed as Dr. Evil in a frock coat, told them what a Twitter hero he is and how powerfully he fights on all fronts. Well, in general, then he wrote further that, what about you? If we strike Kyiv, if this means removing all this crap that is there, how about it? Zelensky, if we strike Kyiv, yeah, right, Putin wants peace, Medvedev wants peace. You know, at that parade, he reminded me of, have you ever met people who feel absolutely terrible on Monday morning? With him, you could just see it oozing out of his pores how bad he felt. He was like a volcano inside. He was full of hatred. He was trembling. He'd been drinking until 7 in the morning, and at 7:30, he had to go to work. In other words, it was really hard for him. Especially at the parade, it was difficult for him to show any interest. On one side of him was Matvienko, and on the other, Patriarch Kirill and Medvedev. Where am I? God, what is going on? That's the news for you, friends. But I hope they'll finally squeeze the life out of this scum. And if he doesn't agree to a truce now, well, as an acquaintance of mine, who's seen some of the draft sanctions, but told me these will really be serious, tough, painful, and unpleasant sanctions. That's why Putin started to panic. That's why he ran out with his papers and kept going on about how he wants this and that. But the Kyiv regime just won't let him. It won't be long now, friends. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. And if possible, support the fundraiser. Check whether you're on the official channel or not. Let's all have a peaceful day. By the way, the ceasefire literally just ended. 100 Shaheds flew into Ukraine. That's how much this scum, this Baldysaurus wants peace. There you have it. Let's all have a peaceful day. And of course, glory to Ukraine.